let's just start with quick intros from Jay and Jamie. People at this point know who Jamie is, but there are some that probably don't know who Jay is. So I guess let's just do the quick intros for the people that don't know who you are, Jay.
Okay. My name is Jay Meagher. I've been working with cars and engines for a couple decades now. Started off with pushrod stuff, so I have some background on what it takes to stabilize valve train in a pushrod engine, and have peeped into some of the OE approaches on fixing valve train over the last 30, 40, 50 years, because the early engines were quite a mess, and then started messing with Jay-Z stuff, some Honda K, some Honda F, and some Honda B, but nothing nearly as deep down the Honda rabbit hole as you guys have been.
Yeah, well, we're Honda guys, so you know. Okay, well, thanks for joining us today. We hope you can ask some good questions based off of your own experiences and insight as well. And then gratuitously, Jamie, why don't you just do a quick little intro?
Sure. Jamie Marsh. Most of the Honda industry probably knows me from tuning, from the tuning side of things. Started my early years in the SR20, um, where I slowly branched over to the Nissan stuff. But naturally, as a tuner, I've sort of touched the broad spectrum of both import and domestic 4, 6, and 8 cylinders. Ton of 2J stuff, a lot of 4G, everything across the board in the Honda scene. So fortunate enough to have the mentor on the right of me on my screen, Dave,
Brendan?
sort of
Oh,
right
Nick,
there
Brennan. Mentors. They're on the right.
to sort of push me to look beyond the average, valve train geometries, velocities, just general cam design, and beyond. There's some things that I'm sure we'll touch on later.
All right. Well, I think the reason why I wanted to have you guys in on this conversation is because you guys are engine guys. You've proven it over your own racing and professional experiences that you guys are into the engines, and it's important to have people that have a good understanding of the engine before we can even talk about the cam. You know, Camshafts, I would say, is one of the great mysteries in the engine. Like everybody can do the pistons and the rods and put together and balance it and stuff like that, but there's so much misinformation regarding camshafts, why things work a certain way, or why things fail, or why things are incompatible, why things are compatible. And there's a lot of that information that's not out there. You'd be hard pressed to even find it if you were to, try searching for camshaft stuff on the internet, and you end up basically with a lot of the same very general descriptions that are regurgitated over and over again. And then people twist that. So you got this stream of information that has been twisted over time, and there's nobody there to really correct it. Right? How many people do we actually know that know enough about camshafts and engines to offer good information on that stuff other than just generalizations? So today, my plan was just kind of tell you my journey learning about camshafts. Because when I started this in the 90s, I was an enthusiast. Camshafts was new to me. I didn't know what a camshaft was, what it was really about. So let me just show you. Let's turn the clocks back to 1996 and 1997, and I will show you the project that got me started into all of this stuff. Here we go. This is a real. I tried looking for pictures of this camshaft, and this is actually the Mugen Group A camshaft. They called it a 3045, so it basically had a 1 millimeter opening at 30 and a 1 millimeter closing at 45 after BDC. So this was the camshaft that they ran in these cars. I don't know if you guys, how old are you guys? Jay, how old are you?
46.
46. How old are you in 89?
11.
Jamie, how old are you in 89? Like 6?
3.
3. So we're turning the box.
I don't think I've seen a Civic race car that early before, besides like the Turbo 2s.
Right. So just to kind of give you a little bit of history on what those Mugen cams were used in. So we have this like EF9 Group A car. This was the later car, right? 93 was probably these schemes in 93, right? These are all very familiar race cars to the Honda crowd, right? And then this was a 4th generation Civic. This was the original Group A cars in Japan. They actually called it JTC, which was Japan Touring Car. And then later on, we know that JTC turned into JTCC, which was basically like British touring car rules. But the source of this was the inspiration for the company's name, Group A. Group A is a FIA class for touring car racing. A lot of the cars that we saw later on in the later 90s, like the EKs, those Civics, those were actually not Group A cars. Those were Super N1, which were more like showroom stock type of cars. But these Group A cars you could change everything on them, everything from suspension to engine. All they really had was a lift rule on the camshafts. So that was the first project that got me started. I had a team in Thailand. I've mentioned the team that I worked with in Thailand. And they basically had a problem. They would run these Mugen racing cams for maybe 2 races and they would wear out. As hard it is for people to believe that OEM JDM would ever wear out, that was the reality of it. If you look at it, they're VTEC killer, right? So you have VTEC, it's like 2 lobes. There's no center lobes missing, right? So these things would wear out in about 2 races. So the team in Thailand initially asked me to just duplicate the camshaft so it wouldn't wear out. And I had no clue about how to make a camshaft or who to make a camshaft or who to go to help me with this problem. So I had a friend at CompTech. Do you guys remember CompTech?
Famous Integra.
These cars, right? So they were like the factory. They were doing the factory IndyCar engine support. That's all taken in by HPD now. But I had a friend who worked at CompTech, and he referred me to Jim Dewar over at Megacycle. Have you guys heard of Megacycle before?
No.
So Jim Dewar is a small camshaft outfit in San Rafael, California, or I believe San Rafael or Santa Rosa, California. And he's an extremely talented engineer, and he was making all the camshafts for the Honda touring car stuff for CompTech. And his relationship with Honda was mainly motorcycle. Obviously, with a name like Megacycle, he's a motorcycle specialist. But over time, he developed he's a real. I would say he's a pretty significant camshaft designer within our industry, and it's funny because the camshaft designers they're usually pretty secret. People don't really say who the camshaft designers are. Okay, so here we see here Megacycle Cam, San Rafael. And if we look at what their specialty was, you see that hard faced on stock core, new billet cams, hard faced on new billet core with needle bearing journals. So the way that we solved the camshaft wearing out problem was we hard faced it. All right. Are you guys are familiar with hard facing at all?
Yep.
Okay, so import guys, it's like hard facing. Definitely V8 guys know more about it because the NASCAR stuff was hard faced for the longest time. And what hard facing is they apply a hard metal, and in this case, it's a nickel boron silica based hard weld that they put on the surface. And if you look here in the picture, they're like hard facing some giant gear. They hard face buckets from, where's that bucket loader picture? So this is all hard weld. It's a really common industrial practice, not commonly applied. Well, it normally wouldn't be applied to cars, but let's call it American ingenuity. We applied it to camshafts, and it was probably the most important metal for probably the most important technique through the 90s in terms of just keeping NASCAR engines alive because those are all flat tappet. So the hard facing is an ultra hard nickel boron silica material. It's not only is it hard, but the nickel makes it really slick too. So it has incredible wear and compression properties. So it's pretty much going to slide better than any other materials that we put on valve trains. Like now we use coatings and different things like that, but in the absence of the PVD coatings back in the 90s, we had to use the hard face with the high nickel content weld in order to get these things to survive. And so I'll just show you our first cams that we had Megacycle do for us in 1997. And you can see the hard weld. Right, so all of this is material that was added on, welded, and then reground. And this technique absolutely solved the problem. In fact, my mentor, who I did these for, it was kind of a joke between us because after probably 10 years, they still had these things running in different club cars, and they were still okay after all that time. So it was this technique, hard facing. This technique is actually not common outside of the United States. Like the Asian camshaft manufacturers, they don't know how to do this. And I think the big issue is they don't know how to straighten it after they weld it. So yeah, these are our first hard face. These are our first hard face cams in 1997. Okay. You guys have any questions thus far?
What is the follower? What was the follower doing on the early camshafts that we're wearing, and what was the follower doing on the hard face cam? And how much did the slick property of the nickel help the follower live?
It was the easiest thing for this follower to ride on is because it's so slick.
Was the follower wearing as the cam lobe was wearing in the early configuration?
No, it was mainly the cam that was wearing. So like these pads are powdered metal. So they're super hard. They have a lot of chrome in them. And typically, the reason why I didn't just make steel cams is because these pads aren't compatible with steel. The second you run them on steel, it galls itself to death. Right. So the hard facing actually, these pads are really hard. The hard facing material is even harder and slicker. And there was actually no wear issues, at least in those engines, because another thing is the lifts were very small. Right. These were only like 12 millimeter lifts as opposed to Like on the drag race engines, you know, on the K drag race engines, even though it's using a different type of valve train, I mean, we're running 16 millimeters of lift, so it's like completely different animal. I don't know how well the hard face would hold up when you really start to push the lift and the spring pressures, because that's really the problem that causes this is the lift and the spring pressure, you know. Um, but I suspect it would last just fine, you know, because now they're doing a lot of coatings and a lot of different heat treatments. They're still not getting up to as slick and durable as a hard face surface is, you know. And it may sound like I'm promoting hard facing. I'm not necessarily doing that. It's actually a very flexible way for you to make some new cores. If you just took the old core and just welded material on there and then use that as your blank. But like I said, with the hard facing, the difficulty is all in the straightening. The NASCAR stuff was interesting because let's say if this was the lobe, they would actually cut a slot. They would cut a slot like that into the camshaft, and then they would fill this with hard weld. And so they called that slot facing. So that NASCAR did slot facing for years and years and years and years while everybody was trying to find a material that would last. You know, in terms of the most tortuous flat tappet engine is probably the old NASCAR engines. You know, I haven't followed NASCAR in a long time now, so I don't really know what the engine configurations. I haven't followed the cars of tomorrow, anything that's new. So I don't know what they're doing now. All right, so that was my first. That was my first foray with camshafts. What are you saying?
What was that profile? So was that actually a direct? It was just a copy of that Mugen cam at the time, or did that inspire some new profile in the chase for designing a more durable cam?
This was. You figure this was the biggest cam back in the mid '90s, and the lift was determined by the rules, so it wasn't even as close to as big as it could have been. We weren't close to finding any limits on any parts back then. I mean, everything was just so forever durable, you know, at those lifts and like low lifts, low spring rates, come on, and like low RPMs, you know, everything is going to last a lot longer.
So the problem set was really durability. I mean, it was really just physically creating a camshaft that could hold up to the wear and tear of that type of endurance racing.
Yeah, that camshaft basically was a Mugen 3045, and then they had like a 30 20. They had like 30 50, and they had like a 30 40. They had all sorts of different camshaft specs that were listed like that.
And at the time, who were some of the other players besides Mugen, or was it only Mugen?
For the Group A stuff, it was only Mugen. Like nobody was really pushing the limits of the B engine except for that class. So that's like 1980, 80, 88, 89. You know, by the time the series got to, I believe, 93, they already switched to JTCC, which is those Accords, and then all the Civics switched to Super N1.
Does that inspire some of those reverse head H22s that I've seen floating around back then?
Yeah, the British touring car stuff was it was actually F20B engine, so the 2-liter H22 engine with the head flipped, and they probably flipped it just because you couldn't find any counter rotating gearboxes back then.
Got it.
You know, that was like an issue. Like everybody, like back in those days, everybody's like, "Oh, the Honda engine spins the wrong way." Right, and the B engine arguably spins the wrong way. Right.
I was thinking more efficiency, intake and exhaust efficiencies, the proximity of the inlet, assuming that these were individual throttle, the
Yeah.
proximity of that bell mouth to the firewall. I thought they were trying to solve some problem there.
Well, obviously, there's an advantage when you put the runners pointing forward.
Sure.
You know,
And also
and
the header
the,
as well.
Those cars were super trick. I mean, the engines were tilted super far over and moved back. So it was a lot. It was those cars were definitely ahead of what we were doing in the import scene over here. Like those cars were light years ahead. So after we made these prototype cams, I'm like, okay, well, how do I make it? How do I make a production cam? And this is where I learned lots of stuff. It was a trial by fire.